Diocese of Fort Worth joyfully announces the priestly ordination of Eric Flores and Benjamin Grothaus by the imposition of hands and the invocation of the Holy Spirit by His Excellency Bishop Michael Olson. All KATH 910 AM listeners are cordially invited to attend the ordination Mass on Saturday, May 18th at 10 a.m. at St. Patrick Cathedral in Fort Worth. Support Eric and Benjamin during this great time of joy and celebration.
Thanks for listening to KATH 910 AM, Frisco, Dallas, Fort Worth, and North Texas. Catholic radio for your soul on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Heard also at grnonline.com and on your smartphone. Welcome to A Life Lived Joyfully, brought to you by the Guadalupe Radio Network. Join us as we explore the call to holiness and the life of virtue. Here's your host, Msgr Charles Pope.
And it is I, speaking to you from the rather chilly, cold, and rainy Washington, D.C. right now. We're having a rather chilly start to May, but it's going to get hot. That much I know, because that comes to Washington, D.C. eventually, and it parks, and it stays, and it simmers. But until that time, we're enjoying a little bit of cool weather here. I want to talk to you today, as we begin the show, about an important thing to cultivate in our lives that too easily, especially in our modern world, we lose, and that's wonder and awe. To just be like little children and just be amazed at what God does. Had a call today, earlier today, from a friend who's also a religious sister, and she was saying, I just can't believe it. We had these beautiful northern lights, and, we had a solar storm that hit us. For those of you who ever follow these things, and they created a huge solar storm hit us, which is the negative side, but the beauty that it creates in the northern lights, the aurora borealis, is astonishing, and just to say, wow, look what God does. And I will say that over my life, I have become much more of a mystic on the move. When I was a young man, I'd walk past all these glorious, beautiful things and just pay no attention. But as I've gotten older, I've become more childlike again. And I'm like, wow, ooh, neat. Look what God did. I see beautiful, what do you call them? The cotton-like clouds. And I'm like, wow, look at that. Or we had a sunset the other day that was just gorgeous, and I just stopped in my tracks. And people think I'm crazy. Come on, we got to get going. But I said, no, look at that. So I think sometimes today we lack wonder and awe. And we think we have everything scientifically figured out. There's lots of reasons for it in our culture, but we don't have it all figured out. Science is pretty good at answering what we might call material causality and efficient causality, but not formal or final causality. Why? Why all this, Why are there daisies? Why is there love? Why is there anything at all? Science isn't very good at answering those sorts of questions. It requires metaphysics and theology and poetry and art to discover some of that. Well, I ran across an article from Michael Warren Davis, and he publishes this. I put a link on our show notes that you can see over at YouTube or Instagram or over there at a number of these other sites that we have. But Michael Warren Davis, and the title of the article is Want of Wonder. He says 7 suggestions for becoming more childlike. Now, we're not going to look at all 7 here. I'll let you read that full article on your own. But I will say that he starts out with a quote from G.K. Chesterton. He says, "The world will never starve for want of wonders, only for want of wonder." That is to say, too many of us no longer look for things and want to wonder over. We think we have it all figured out. It's all just a bunch of, metaphysical reasons for everything and so on. Again. We know a few more things than we did, say, 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago even, but, we don't know an awful lot of things, and God does incredible things. So let me begin this article from Michael Warren Davis. And he says here, "One day I was sitting at our kitchen table watching a compilation of ads from the early 2000s, and like all millennials, I'm kind of a slave to nostalgia. One of I guess those millennials are just getting that. I've had it for a while now because I was born in the early 60s. I was born in 1961, so I'm a little older. But for those of us who, he goes on to say, I'm no slave to nostalgia, but I saw an ad for Boston's Wild Kingdom. And he says, all of a sudden my mind went back to those days when I would go to the circus. And on one day, I could see ride an elephant and ride a Ferris wheel. And life was magical. And he thought of those days when he was a child. And this made him just do a lot of reflection and pondering. And so let me read some more from his article. He says, my grandparents lived north of Boston. And suddenly I remembered Wild Kingdom there, and I was 8 years old again. And my childhood, I remembered my childhood. And I remember that wooden fence that ran halfway around the cliff's edge near the edge of my grandmother's garden. And I remember her favorite flowers and seeing the flowers that grew there. And every day they would come back, these flowers, and bloom so beautifully. And as I've often told people, my childhood was idyllic. I grew up in a fashionable old farmhouse about an hour north of Boston. There were 10 acres of woods in our backyard that used to belong to John Greenleaf Whittier. Now they belong to the Historical Society, which means for all practical purposes they belong to me. And unless Wallig the farmer was moving the big field for hay, I had a place all to myself. And I spent hours in those woods walking with the dog, sometimes with my mom, climbing the trees with my dad, and building forts with my friends, or reading out in the sun of the meadow. And all of these happy memories came flooding back to me as I saw that commercial for Wild World, a time of wonder and awe. But by the end of the commercial, more than anything else, I felt shame. He says, for example, he says, because today, my own family, we live in a small apartment on a busy road. In the summer, we can't sleep with the windows open because of all the pickup trucks and motorcycles driving by. The backyard is entirely paved over to make way for a parking lot. I'm brokenhearted, not for myself so much, but for my daughters. I hate that I can't give them what I had. All people, but especially children, have an inalienable right to nature. And my daughters deserve at least that much, he goes on to say. And again, I have to say with my own reflections, I remember as a kid, we didn't have internet in those days. We had 3 television stations, mostly had soap operas on the afternoon, and there was one UHF station that sort of ran some reruns that were fun. But at the end of the day, what we did when we got home from school, we did a little bit of homework, and then we'd run out and ride our bikes or have a pickup football game across the street in the field, or we'd go out in the woods, and we had tree forts that we built, and we were very active physically, and we were out in nature, and we often wouldn't come back until dark. Or right when we knew maybe Mom would often hold the dinner for us so we could just be out playing. And I see how little of that there is today. Part of it is that people have computers, they have screens that they sit in front of, but video games, I never had those growing up. I just missed them. I think my brother, who's 10 years younger than I, he had all that. The only video game I ever played was something called Pong, if any of you remember what that is. It was just this very crude game, like a tennis ball going back and forth, and you and your opponent had a paddle, and you tried to... Anyway, even if you don't know what it is, it was very crude. It was not there was no visual graphics and things like that. All right. At the end of the day, we were kind of in a way forced to make our own fun. We'd go out, and when I was a little kid, I would dress up like Batman and Robin, my brother would be, and we'd be Superman, and we'd put on towels and pretend we had capes on, and we'd go out and save the world. And this sort of imaginary play and use of the imagination, and we would take a stick and it became a gun or a sword. We would go out and save the world, and or at night we would play something called German Spotlight, and all these were just kind of games that we would play. And That's a lot of that's gone now. Riding of bikes, all the fun stuff, the sports and things, and it wasn't even organized. It was just what we call sandlot baseball or football. We just go out in the local fields near somewhere and just sort of do a pickup game, you know. And a lot of that's gone now. You see, and so again, this our author here is sort of pondering the same thing. All these things that I had as a kid, he says his own kids don't have them. But then again, he thinks again. He says, "But wait a minute. Wait a minute." He says, "It is true. We do live in this small apartment on a busy road, and I am broken-hearted. My children do have this inalienable right to nature and things that I had that they don't seem to have. But all these thoughts are surging around," he says, "as I sit at the kitchen table. But then I look out the window, and next door there's a huge abandoned house. The backyard is completely overgrown, and there's just one little rose that springs forth there, and that rose stands out." And he says, and suddenly it began to occur to me. I realized two things, which are really the same thing. He says, first of all, my daughters are going to delight in the world around them, as long as I don't get in their way. Our 3-year-old Beatrice loves nothing more than to splash in the puddles in our dismal parking lot. Whenever it rains, she goes out and puts on her boots and splashes in the puddles. Secondly, I wouldn't be so down on our apartment or our yard or our neighborhood or the world if I could look at the world the way she does. We see the exact same world. She sees the exact same world that we saw as children. The difference isn't out there. The difference is inside. It's in myself. We allow ourselves to become bored and cynical, and we take the world for granted. But children see whatever's in front of them is magical, something to learn, you know. And he goes on and he talks about that. He says, you know, I remember growing up, I remember we had a lot of snow one year, and then it all was finally melting in the spring. This was in Chicago, and we had just this big mud pile in the backyard. And you would think that the yard was not, you couldn't go out there and play in the yard. It was just too muddy. Not so. We have pictures of this. My brother and I put on our raincoats and our boots, and we went out there and we splashed in that mud, and we had the greatest time of all. It's amazing that kids can kind of bloom where they're planted. They may not have the big yard you had as a kid, but they have what they have, and they can turn it into magic. Don't get in their way. Don't get in their way. Let them find magic in a puddle. You say, well, that's just a dismal old parking lot. I had a yard to run in. And don't worry too much. These kids find magic in everything if we let them. And I'm adding my own thoughts in here, but I think what happens, though, is we throw an iPad at them when they're like 1.5 years old, and we make them live in this little world that's not the real world they live in. And then they start to sort of take that as a substitute. But take some of that away and let them find magic in the real world around them. Otherwise, they get kind of lost in that little screen, you know. And so obviously there's going to have to be some need to let them use some of these devices. But on the other hand, don't be too discouraged. You know, let them find magic in the things that are. Another experience I can say to you is I had the opportunity about 20 years ago to go back to my childhood home in Glenview, Illinois, and the people who lived there were kind enough to let me come in and just look at the house. And all these memories came rushing in on me of that house. And we made play ports of everything there. We had closets we set up little things in, and all kinds of magic in that house. But I was amazed at how small it was. You know, people today have these huge houses they want to live in, 3,500 square feet. That house was like 900 square feet. It felt like a kingdom to me. And we would go in those closets, and we would play games and hide and seek, and we'd go out in the backyard, and we had all kinds of stuff down in the basement. We put down train sets, and we would, like I say, there was a pole that, you know, a big metal pole that held up the house and in the basement, and that was a bat pole. We turned that into the bat pole. We were Batman and Robin for a minute, and then I'd put on another cape, and I'd be Superman, and we'd come jumping off the. There was like a laundry drawer, a door, you know, to the basement on the outside. It was like a sloping door that you could open. If you might think of like, I don't know, some of those cellars and things. You know, it has a kind of You open it up like a door. We turned it into a slide, and my goodness, we would just command the world from the top of that slide. And king of the mountain I was for a moment. And so we turned everything into just a plaything. That's just what kids are. They're full of joy and wonder and awe, and they make use of what's in front of them. And yes, there's an iPad in front of them, but it shouldn't be the only thing in front of them, But the real world, let them run outdoors and have fun in the yard. And these are the things that, again, that our author here is pondering, and that I'm also pondering with you. That it was just such an imagination that children have. Now, this is all leading somewhere. He says, but let me just read this one thing that he says. I've already read it, but I want to read it again. You see, even though my daughter's world is different than the one I grew up in, we still have the same exact world that we had as children. The difference isn't really out there. The difference is in here, in myself. And the danger that we think, well, they can't have what I had, so they won't be able to have imagination or fun. Don't let them do what you did. Have fun with what they do have. Discover, explore it, and have wonder and awe. And we will talk about that more on the other side of the break.
It's to truly save souls. It's to save souls, and we have a lot of different media platforms, whether it's through our TV, radio, music, and it's all promoting this culture that is really here to kill, steal, and destroy souls. And to have that Catholic voice on the air that is proclaiming the good news and able to touch and transform lives, what better thing to support?
The Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul.
Hello, I'm Steve Gleason, your Wednesday host for the weekly show called A Life Lived Joyfully. We explore the call to holiness and the life of virtue. Join Sarah Soto, Monsignor Pope, and myself as we dive into church teaching, sacred scripture, and practical ways to experience dramatic growth in our faith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll watch for your questions and comments during the show. We'll be looking for you.
I'd known about the station for a long time, but I have to confess I never tuned in. Perhaps I was biased. But then that changed, actually. Once I started listening, I kept the dial where it was at. I like Teresa Tomeo and Al Kress. I just like their personalities. Call to Communion with Dr. Dave Anders and More to Life with the Pop Checks. I really, really love the show. I've learned a lot. But also, I really like that there's prayers interspersed. I get a lot more praying done in the day that I wouldn't otherwise. We want to support the radio station for sure.
The Guadalupe Radio Network, Catholic Radio. Radio for your soul. Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
And we are back. I'm just going to give that number one more time, 877-757-9424. Do you have any memories from childhood? Some of you are older than I am. I'm in my 60s. So that just gives you a time frame. But, before all this internet, before all this kind of make-believe sort of stuff that we sit in front of screens, there was a different world out there. It was a beautiful world. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was kids. We went out into nature. We built forts. We were just, all kinds of games and things and riding of bikes, and we just turned everything into a big adventure, and it was different. It was not every kid can go out into nature like we once did today, given our kind of urbanization and stuff that's taken place. But still, kids can do an awful lot, even in the basement. You just put some toys out, and you'd be surprised what they can do. But do you have remembrances of childhood before all this kind of stuff that kids have today? How you had some fun. Maybe just call and tell me, or let me know what your thoughts are about what kids deal with today. I think one of the things that our author that we're quoting from here had to realize is that my daughter doesn't have everything I had, but she has what she has. And I'm amazed that even with what seems a lot less, she's able to do just what I did, just wonder and awe. Look, there's puddles. Let's go out and jump in them. No, you'll get wet, dear. We have all kinds of rational reasons to say, no, don't do that. But at the end of the day, kids just are excited and joyful. They want to touch nature. They want to be part of it. They want to get out and play in it. And not just nature per se, but just reality. So we had a dingy basement in that old house. But for me, it was like the universe. I could go out there and into the basement and just run around down there. And I was surprised as an adult when I toured that house how small it really was. You don't notice that when you're a kid. It seems like huge. And those closets we would hide in and build things in, and Legos and blocks and other things that we would use, all of those things, how would I even fit in there? And I thought it was just spacious in the whole world. I thought I had the biggest house in the world. Anyway, you get the point. Now, a few more things from this article, and then I'm going to read you some other things that I've written over the years. But I had a friend I was talking with one day, and he said to me, when we talked about this issue, he said, well, when you're a kid, your job is to suck as much nectar out of life as possible. But then when you're an adult and you have a child, that part of your life is over. Now, your job is to protect her or him while they suck all the nectar out of life as possible. And he says, I told him then what I'll tell you now. That's dead wrong. Popular culture feeds us with this idea that marriage is the ball and chain, that children are a nuisance, or that they force you to be relentlessly adult. But that's a lie. Yes, as a parent, you have to protect your kids, of course. But the Master, Jesus, didn't say unless he did he not say, unless you be converted and become like little children, you'll not enter the kingdom of heaven? I know this subject makes some Christians break out in hives. As with all the Lord's teachings, our instinct is to try to explain it away or, kind of contain it, to refine it and clarify it on our terms, until what we're left for is nothing but a truism. When this particular passage comes up, I hear a lot of folks say, yeah, I get that. We're supposed to be childlike, but not childish. Really, though, if anyone has ever met a child, knows exactly what Jesus means. If you've really met a child and you see them, you know what he means. He wants us to be kind and friendly as children are. He wants us also to be open and trusting as children are. He wants us to be innocent like children are. And he wants us to be filled with wonder, full of wonder and awe at all things like children are. Wow, look what God did. Look at this. This is not how we are as adults too often. Oh, yeah, well, I know how that goes. Look at that red sunset. Yeah, well, it's probably that color because of volcanic activity somewhere in the world. Stop explaining it. There's a couple of old sayings that come to mind when you look at a sunset or something beautiful in nature. Don't just do something, stand there. Don't just do something, stand there, you see. And so again, there's this call to, stop trying to explain and analyze everything. Stop all the analysis. Just let your jaw drop and say, wow. And I said, look what God did, And, God didn't really do that. That's the combination of volcanic activity and the elongated rays of the sun. No, stop it. That's an explanation, but it's not the full explanation. It's just not. All right. As always, Chesterton, he says, put it best. When we are very young children, Chesterton said, we don't need fairy tales. We only need tales. Mere life is interesting enough. A child of 7 is excited by being told that Tommy opened a door and saw a dragon. But the child of 3 is excited by being simply told that Tommy opened a door. And so, in fact, God himself is childlike. This is a wonderful paragraph here. Because children have an abounding vitality, because they are in spirit fierce and free, therefore they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, do it again. And the grown-up person does it again until he's nearly dead with repetition. For grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony, but perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning to the whole creation, do it again, to the sun, and every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatically an automatic necessity that he makes all the daisies alike, but it may be that God makes every daisy separately because he's never gotten tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy. For the rest of us, though, we have sinned and we've grown old, and our Father is younger than we are. You know, and we're to be set by monotony and boredom, and we think we have everything figured out. You know, the world isn't enchanted anymore, and ho hum. You know, and that's kind of how we get as we get relentlessly adult and overly scientific. I'm a big fan of science, y'all. Don't get me wrong. But science really should, I can't imagine that every scientist, if they're truly a scientist, is not on their knees saying, wow, I never knew how awesome this interaction is at every level, microbiology, all down to the very lowest levels of cells and molecules and atoms, and how all this stuff just works together marvelously. It's like, wow. And somewhere people put on these lab coats and walk around looking bored, or looking all wise because they know one aspect. My gosh, you know, we stopped just saying, wow, neat. And this is the kind of thing I think we have to rediscover. So again, all of these are just ways of saying that we have a lot to do with growing in wonder and awe. Now, back to our author, just a couple things he says. I won't give all 7 things he gives, but the first step, he says, to becoming childlike is simply recognizing that we literally are children. We have to entrust ourselves as children to the Father's love. We have to wrestle with this truth until it sinks deep inside us. You are, in fact, a child. Now, I'm 6 feet tall, and I won't tell you how many pounds overweight. I have gray hair, or at least my beard's gone gray, and I look old, but to God, I'm just a little kid. And I've always looked that way. He doesn't call me Msgr. He calls me Carlito, little Charlie. It's just amazing. See, what happens to us is that we say, well, I've got this, God, don't worry, I'm going to go over here and take care of things on my own terms, and I'll get back to you if I need your help. You know, this is dumb. It's stupid. Do you understand? Think of an infant. An infant depends on his or her parents for just about everything, right? But there are some things even an infant can do on its own without the parents' help, like breathing and, well, let's just be honest, a poopy diaper, free of charge, okay? But at the end of the day, you and I cannot even cause the next beat of our heart. So although an infant is completely dependent on their parents for just about everything, we're even more so dependent upon God to hold every fiber of our being in existence. We are just little children that he holds in the palm of his hand. See? And get back to knowing this. He says, Jesus says, if you don't, you'll never inherit the kingdom. You're just too proud. Your big head won't fit into heaven. It's just too big, you know. And we got to get back to saying, wow, Daddy God, help me. Or, you know, little kids know when there's something they're afraid of, they run right to mom or dad. They don't just say, let me study this and let me go to the therapist. You know, they just go run to mom and dad and say, help, you know. So, again, all of these are ways of saying that we become, in our culture particularly, but it's a human problem. It transcends the questions of just now. But we often lose our sense of just being awestruck at what God does. And he also says, this is the other advice our author gives here. He says, go outside for an hour every day if you can. Human beings need nature in order to thrive physically, mentally, spiritually. That's why children are happy to spend literally all day playing on a tiny patch of brown grass. Man, we played football in that sandlot back there, man. It was worn down to nothing but to the roots of that grass. But we were out there every day, you know. And children haven't learned to suppress these instincts. Nature is genuinely interesting. Make a small effort to just really notice something. A bird, a stream, a tree, an anthill, a cloud. You'll be hypnotized. See? Say, wow, look what God is doing. I hope some of you saw those northern lights that came. You know, we had a real big solar storm. And those northern lights were were just a magnificent display. We didn't get it this far south in Washington, D.C., but up in New England and other places I know, up in Minnesota, they saw such a display. It's like, wow. And I have pictures I collected. There's a couple people I know that that get this. I sent them the pictures and say, okay, this side says, ooh, and this side said, ah. And it's just, well, now we know what causes this. This is the ions interacting with, oh, stop it. You're telling me scientifically, but look at that. Isn't that awesome? You see, look how good and glorious and powerful and omnipotent God is. Look at that. And ponder the awesomeness of the sun that sent us what's negative like a solar storm, but created such beauty. Ponder this mystery. We are on a planet that is utterly and astonishingly set for life, and in the sense that there are so many things that come together to make life possible here. And one of them is that we have a magnetic field around the Earth that deflects the harmful rays of the sun, and that's why you get the northern lights. But isn't that a sign of beauty and protection? As all those harmful rays bouncing off the atmosphere so they don't harm us. Look up at those things and say, oh, thank you, Lord. Thank you for what you've done for us. Thank you for protecting us. So all of these are powerful things that we get. Well, we're coming, you hear by the music, we've come to the break. I do hope maybe some of you call me with an idea or two about your youth. 877-757-9424. And I'll see you on the other side of the break.
Thanks for listening to A Life Lived Joyfully. Do you have a question for Monsignor Pope, or would you like to comment? Give us a call now at 877-757-9424. Again, that number is 877-757-9424. We'll be back after the break.
Many Protestants believe Christians can be absolutely sure they're going to heaven because John tells us in 1 John 5:13, I write this that you may know you have eternal life. But is this true? The answer is no, and here are some reasons why. First, John writes in the next verse, and this is the confidence which we have in him. For John, the knowledge we have of our salvation is not a certainty without doubt, but a confident assurance. And that's the Catholic belief. Second, we know this is what John means because in verse 15, he draws a parallel between our knowledge of salvation and our knowledge that God grants our requests. Do we have absolute certitude that God will grant our requests? No, but we are confident he will answer. So, Catholics need not worry. John is not teaching Protestant doctrine here. I'm Carlo Broussard with the ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Hey Donnie, what are the two most important things we receive at Mass?
The Christmas scripture.
That's right. All right, one more. Who loves you the most?
Jesus.
That's right.
Mary.
That's right. They love us too. If you don't educate your children in the faith, who will? Educate yourself and your family by listening daily to the Guadalupe Radio Network, and make sure to get the GRN app by logging online to grnonline.com.
I don't know why I turned on my radio because I've kept my radio off for years. And once I turned it on, I was absolutely hooked. I love the shows with a Catholic apologist. I love the shows with the sort of day-to-day psychologist, Greg and Lisa Popchak. I love hearing not just of other people's problems who call in, but I love getting the Catholic take on how to deal with day-to-day reality.
The Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul. Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
Again, that's 877-757-9424. You know, one of the things that I just want to maybe branch off and kind of make some reflections of my own. You know, in recent years, I would say recent years, maybe the last 10 or 15 years really, but When I was a younger man, I didn't pay a lot of attention. As a kid, I did, but I mean, when I became like a teenager and into my 20s and early 30s, to me, the creative world was just, come on, I gotta get on with things that are on my mind, and But as I've gotten older, I've just become like a mystic on the move, and I'm just astonished. I walk past a rose and I see its beauty, and I stop. Or I look up and I see the blue clouds. I mean, the blue skies with the white clouds like cotton balls, and I think, wow, and our mountains and forest. I live here in the middle Atlantic, and I think we're one of the most luscious places on the planet with the different types of trees we have, and they're so green and rich, and their canopy they cover over. It almost looks like a rainforest sometimes. We're rich with rain. We got 40 to 50 inches of rain a year here in the Middle Atlantic, and that's even more than Seattle. It's just to see the beautiful green canopy now of the things, or to watch the mesmerizing fall of a snowfall, like it's hypnotic to see the steady dropping of the snow. I just can't fail to be amazed and just say, oh, wow, And then I think of God's glory and majesty, and if you look at outer space, think about it, if you were to make a scale model of the Milky Way galaxy and, reduce every sun to the size of a grain of sugar, it'd still be 2,000 miles wide and 1,000 miles high. And that's just one galaxy. There are billions of galaxies, and they're all expanding outward at the edges of the universe at almost 100,000 miles an hour, and picking up speed as it does. And it's just amazing. It's huge. It's just unbelievably large and huge. And here we are, just tiny little specks on a slightly larger speck floating through the immensity of space. And the things and the wonders out there, the nebula, the black holes, just the astonishing number of stars and planets. And all you can say is, wow. And we're all swirling around. The Earth is turning at at our latitude here, about 800 miles an hour, turning off in one direction toward the east. And likewise, the Earth is going around the sun at a very amazing speed, and the sun is going around spinning around the universe at yet a more of an amazing speed. And if you think you're standing still, think again. It's like clinging and whirling as we roar through this space at breakneck speed. Some 80,000 miles an hour the Earth goes around the sun, and then the sun is spinning around at several 100,000 miles an hour around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. Whirling around we are, clinging and whirling, and we say, if you think you're standing still, well, I got news for you, you're not. And I could go on and on, but the awesomeness that we see in outer space, and its marvels, and our tininess in comparison to it, and God does it all. But here's something that we often don't think a lot about. There's a whole other world that we call not outer space, but inner space. So think about it. What's equally amazing is this world, this inner space, it's hid from our unaided eyes. But it's a tiny world, an almost invisible world of microbiology. Just one drop of pond water, for example. In one drop of pond water can exist hundreds of thousands of bacteria and other microorganisms, a veritable universe unto itself. Indeed, in every human body exist trillions of microorganisms in a kind of a microbial, if you will, fauna. 80 different types of microorganisms lives in our mouth alone. Scary. You better go brush your teeth, right? 80 different types of microorganisms exist there. Every square centimeter of the human bowel, sorry for the word, but contains as many as 10 billion organisms. And every square centimeter of our skin contains 10 million individual bacteria. Even our eyelashes are colonies of helpful bacteria that live in our eyelashes, and microorganisms that help keep bad bacteria away. These massively numbered little civilizations and universes, microorganisms are only known recently with the invention of our powerful microscopes. And to the micro world of microorganisms, our bodies must seem to be a massive universe of its own, a kind of a outer space. Think of those little tiny microorganisms that live, in our eyelashes. Our bodies are like a universe to them. It looks upon our mere tiny bodies as a vast universe. So again, instead and we look up and we say, no, there's much bigger things than I am, you little microorganisms, or this little drop of water where tens of thousands of microorganisms, trillions really, exist in these just little drops of water. And yet, to say to them, well, you have no idea how big things really are. Outside this world, of this pond, exists a huge world. And beyond this huge world exists an even huger world where there are trillions of stars, trillions indeed, of just billions of galaxies and swirling around. So, if outer space is magnificent, from the Latin manus meaning great or large, inner space is, I would call it, minificent, from the Latin word minimus meaning very small or tiny. The abundance of life, though, in these small, almost invisible worlds it's just almost unimaginable. How do they fit in there? To the microorganisms that accompany me, as I'm a universe too vast for them to comprehend. But I'm one man, and there are over 7 billion human beings on this planet. And when we look collectively, I'm not large at all. I'm just tiny. I'm a speck, floating around a little fiery spark called the sun, in a galaxy of over 200 billion other fiery stars, and on I could go. You see, so it's time for wonder and awe. We move from inner space to outer space in a matter of moments in our thinking, but we cannot really comprehend the kinds of numbers we're talking about. How many billions and billions of stars, billions of galaxies there are, and how many billions and stars within each of those galaxies, and the speed with which they roar through, and the fact that the whole universe is moving outward in all directions with increasing speed, close to 100 million miles an hour out at the outer edges. Wow. And then we look in, even to our eyelashes or a small drop of pond water, and we see huge worlds that are beyond our ability to see, tiny little worlds where these things go. Wow. And so again, the Lord does all this. He does it all. He's created all of it. It works amazingly together. Think of a little miracle like photosynthesis, I breathe out CO2. The trees say, oh, I can use that. And they take it in and turn it into oxygen. They exhale oxygen. I say, well, I can use that. And I send them back CO2. Oh, that's just a random happenstance, right? No. There's a funny little meme that there's out there. There are two snowmen talking to each other. And the one snowman says to the other, oh, don't be silly. Nobody made us. We're just a random collection of snowflakes. Well, you and I know better. But the point is, we can have a good laugh at that. But isn't it funny how a lot of people look at the incredible complexity, and yet the magnificent working together of so many elements of creation, and can say the same thing? Well, this is just random chance. It just happened by accident. No. The whole universe shouts, I was designed. I'm maintained. I'm fine-tuned. It's an astonishing and beautiful truth that God has for us, and that for us to have wonder and awe like little children again. It's part of, it's really what it comes down to. It's an act of humility. It's part of being humble to say, wow. Not like, I can figure this out. We'll just take some more time and study this a little more, and I will comprehend it and be done with it. No, you won't. Because even if you can figure out aspects of how it works, you still can't say why it exists at all. You can't really answer that with science. It's a metaphysical question. Science can't answer every question because it's physical sciences. There are physical things that we can see how one thing interacts with another, how one thing influences another. We can measure things like gravity. We can talk about, this, but we can't really explain the exquisite order of all things in the cosmos and the exquisite order of so many things in our own bodies and just the way everything works together in a magnificent synthesis and beauty and glory. It's just not something that science is equipped to answer. And science can say a lot about how things work, but not why, and to what end they're all tending. So our author here sort of makes a conclusion in his article. He says, the older I get, the more convinced I become that this is the key to our happiness, developing a spiritual childhood again. Both in this life and in the next, we're going to be God's children. And just as marriage is not the end of romance, but the beginning of it, and so too adulthood isn't the end of childhood, but just the beginning of it. So we have to learn how to be, if you will, adult children, who know enough to know that we don't know very much. And children say, why? Why, Mommy? Why, Daddy? Why? And we keep asking that question, and that's a beautiful question of childhood, but a question we should still keep answering and staying like that. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the awesomeness of this created world in which we live in, and something called rare earth theory I want to explore with you as well. Okay, on the other side of the break.
Thank you for listening to the Guadalupe Radio Network and being part of the family. Families pray for each other. We would be honored if you would let us pray with you and for you. You don't even have to tell us your name. Just go to our website, grnonline.com, or call our prayer request line and leave us a message at 800-395-4008. That's 800-395-4008. We will be praying for you every day.
So the neighbor who we've spoken to, just in greeting, but who I don't believe has ever spoken back to us, out of the blue, surprised us. One day we were getting the kids in the car for Mass and asked us if we were going to Mass. I was dumbstruck for about probably 10 seconds. It was great that we had an opportunity to share about our parish and that we were Catholic. Turned out she was Catholic too, and she assumed we were because of the bumper sticker on our car.
The Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul.
Hi, Julie Carrick here. I am delighted to be the host of We Sing Our Faith. This weekly program shares beautiful Catholic music and deep insights of many Catholic teachings. Join me on Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock Central Time for We Sing Our Faith here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock Central Time. We Sing Our Faith.
Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
And we are back. And in this final segment, I want to also maybe ask you to ponder with gratitude that there are so many things that come together to make life possible for us on this little blue ball we call the Earth, the third rock from the sun. I think there's a question that a lot of people wonder, with all the different billions of stars and galaxies and so on out there, there must be other habitable planets like ours, as Star Trek calls them, Class M planets, that can support and sustain life, at least life as we know it and define it. They must be out there, and we're not alone, and so on. Well, maybe, maybe not. I mean, I think that I'm not here to make a ruling on that one or the other. It's not something that the faith has anything to say about per se. But I would say that we ought to at least be aware that there's a theory base out there that concludes that if there are Earth-like planets out there that can sustain life as we do here, they're probably fairly rare. It's called rare earth theory. And it's not like one or two things that comes together to make life, habitable here, but it's hundreds of things. And when you start to do statistical analysis of how many other planets have all these hundreds of things, you take any one or two of those away and things kind of collapse pretty quickly here in terms of making us able to sustain life as we know it. If that's the case, what's the statistical probability that there are other Earth-like planets that sustain life in a way like we know, in some kind of intelligent life? So without getting into a big argument, this is not about faith. You're free to say, well, the scientists I listen to don't agree. But I think that there are a lot of things. Let's look at, I've got a list of things that make life on this Earth possible. And you'll start to see as we go through the list that there's a lot of things that start to drop off the radar real quick when you think that there's lots of other planets out there. First of all, Earth is just at the right distance from the sun so that water is warm enough to melt, but not so hot as to boil and steam away into space. So, water is able to kind of, in this habitable zone, the so-called Goldilocks region, both to evaporate and condense at lower levels of our atmosphere to produce rain and abundance of spreading that moisture throughout the planet. But it's not so cold as either to freeze or so hot to boil away. So there's a good even distribution of water throughout the habitable zones, not just in the oceans, but on the dry land, so-called dry land. There are certainly desert regions, yes, but there's lots of regions that are habitable that aren't oceans. And so the Earth is a pretty wide distribution of moisture that permits growth of trees and animals and so many other things. So just at the right zone. Now, for suns to spawn Earth-like planets, they also have to have a sufficient metallicity, which is necessary for the formation of what we call terrestrials. In other words, planets that have mass, not just gaseous planets, like Jupiter and Saturn are largely believed to be gaseous planets, no real firm ground to stand on. Whereas here we have rock and stone and so on. So there has to be a certain degree of metallicity in the local sun and likewise in the solar system for this to be the case. And most solar systems out there that can be observed don't seem to have as much of that as we do. All right. Number 3, Earth is in the habitable zone within the galaxy, closer to the center of galaxies. Radiation and the presence of many wandering planetoids make life there unlikely. So, in other words, we're in a part of the galaxy, the Milky Way, that's kind of clean of a lot of space trash floating around, a lot of junks and rocks. We also have Jupiter and Saturn that are out there that tend to keep the asteroid belt at bay and kind of put it into a belt, keep these rocks from just raining down and hammering us every other day, because space is kind of full of junk, rocks and floating debris. And if you don't have something to keep that stuff at bay, you're in trouble. The planet keeps getting hit and beset by terrible destructive forces. So we do have Jupiter and Saturn. They're out there catching the comets and the other asteroids, keeping them at bay. We also happen to live in a particular part of the galaxy that doesn't have a lot of debris, free-floating debris floating around. So we'll call it the habitable zone within our galaxy, the Milky Way. Now, number 4, Earth exists in a disc-shaped spiral galaxy, the Milky Way, rather than, say, an elliptical or spheroid galaxy. Spiral galaxies are thought to be the only type capable of supporting life. Once again, for some of the reasons I just stated. There's all kinds of questions, too, of gravity and gravitational forces and how planets are formed and different things that take place. And to have a kind of a pancake or spiral-shaped galaxy like we do creates the much more high possibility for the existence of life. Earth's orbit around the sun is also almost a perfect circle, just about 3 degrees off of a perfect circle. Now, most of the other planets, including in this galaxy or this solar system that we're in, have steep ellipses for their orbits. So they come in close, relatively close anyway, and they go far out and at the other end of the ellipsis. Well, the Earth has a slight elliptical orbit, but it's only about 3 degrees off of a perfect circle, which keeps the light and warmth and radiation of the sun kind of at a steady place. Whereas other planets, this is not the case. Even in our own solar system, they go from one extreme to another. They're in close, getting lots of radiation, more warmth, and then they go out where it's much colder and much less radiation. And this back and forth creates a very hostile environment to life that prefers a stable dosage of these things. So again, it's a very stable, nearly circular orbit that keeps us able to sustain life stably, and so on. I already mentioned the two nearby gas giants of Saturn and Jupiter, which provide a nice little service of pulling a lot of comets and other space debris toward them, collecting them either in the asteroid belt or just sucking them into themselves, and so again. Now, likewise, we have a molten core. That is to say, volcanism. This creates lava and creates the geometry of this Earth. These plates are moving around. There are all kinds of things that this does. First of all, volcanoes, terrifying though they are, and earthquakes belch important gases into the Earth that we need to breathe. And likewise, they create this magnetic field around the Earth. All that molten rock under our feet creates this, this field that helps us to block the harmful rays of the sun. They're so-called Van Allen belts out there. I could go on. I have to kind of start wrapping up quicker than I would like. But very quickly, there's a couple of other things to mention. Our star is just the right kind of star, putting out a fairly stable amount of radiation and energy. Other types of stars are much more variable in their output, and that extreme variance, and they go from hot and cold cycles, radiant and less radiant, and it's just too unstable. But our star is very stable right now at its time. Earth's fairly rapid rotation also reduces the daily variation in temperature. The fact that we're spinning at about 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, it helps move the heat and the light and the darkness around. All these things are, I could go on, the list gets longer and longer, but my point is you see many things come together that without one or two of these, life becomes unsustainable here. Wow. Okay? Somebody just say, wow. We've got to get back in the business of being impressed at how finely tuned and so on this beautiful world we live in is, and what God does, and His magnificence and His majesty. Inner space, outer space, all space. Thank you, Lord. You've done all things well. I'll see you again or talk to you on Friday.
Celebrating the culture of life. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your